My son forgot to hang up, and I heard him tell his wife, "She won't be around much longer anyway." 2 weeks later, chaos. Have you ever looked around your own home and realized you were no longer welcome there? Not because of strangers, but because of your own blood. The blanket your husband once wrapped around your shoulders, replaced with silence. The kitchen you cooked in for decades, taken over. Your name, signed onto papers you never read. They said they came home to spend time with me, but what they really wanted was everything I had. I wasn't supposed to hear that phone call, but I did. Every single word. And that's when something shifted. This is not a story about revenge. It's about remembering who you are when everyone else wants you to forget. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, stay with me. Subscribe if you believe no elder should be silenced in their own home. My name is Ellie Bishop. I'm 72 years old, a widow, and a retired librarian from Cedar Brook, Vermont. I've spent most of my life making sure others were cared for. My students, my neighbors, my son. I never asked for much. Just a little kindness. A little space to grow old quietly. But a few weeks ago, my son came back home. And slowly, without a single argument or slammed door, I started to vanish from my own life. This isn't some dramatic courtroom story. No one yelled. No one hit. It was all soft voices, gentle smiles, while my world was being rewritten without me. And maybe that's why it took me so long to see what was really happening. But once I did, I made a list, and I took back everything they thought I'd lost. What follows isn't just my story. It's a reminder, especially to those of you who've spent your whole life giving, that you are allowed to fight quietly and win. Let me tell you what happened, starting with a knock at the door. The sound that promised a reunion, but in truth, heralded an invasion. They said they missed me, but what they really missed was what I had. The air in Cedar Brook had that kind of sharp edge that nipped right through your coat, even if the sun hadn't officially disappeared yet. I wrapped my scarf tighter around my neck and pressed the door of maple and mug open with the side of my hip, just like always. Same cinnamon toast, same black coffee, same cracked table by the window where Warren used to sit, pretending to read the paper but really just watching the people. I still ordered his coffee, sometimes, not to drink it, just to keep the cup warm a little longer. Marcia was already at the counter when I got in. She gave me that look, the kind old friends give when they know something's coming but don't want to be the one to say it. "Holiday visitors?" she asked, sliding over a packet of sugar without looking. "Apparently," I replied. I didn't smile. "Greg says they'll be here sometime this week," which, I suppose, includes today. "Bless your heart," she murmured, stirring her tea. "You sure you're up for all that?" I folded the edge of my napkin into a triangle. "Not really, but they said they missed me." Marcia raised an eyebrow. "Or what you have?" She didn't mean it unkindly. She never did. Back home, the air inside was a little stale, the way it always got when I didn't open windows for a few days. I straightened the pillows in the guest room and laid out fresh towels. My knees ached more than usual when I bent to pick up Warren's old slipper that had been stuck under the bed since who knows when. It was strange. The things you forget until someone else's feet are expected to walk through the room. I hadn't seen Greg in nearly a year. Last winter, he mailed a birthday card. Just a card. No call, no Chloe on the line, no mention of the snowstorm I told him about in my last letter. Just, "Love, Greg." Nothing else. Chloe's name wasn't even scribbled in crayon like she used to. I told myself he was busy. I always did. They arrived around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. the sound of tires crunching through frost-blistered gravel jolting me from the kitchen where I was defrosting chicken. Shayla stepped out first, always polished, like she was dressed for a business luncheon instead of an overnight visit. She didn't carry any bags. That was Greg's job. Or mine. Chloe lagged behind, her coat half-zipped, earbuds dangling. She didn't say anything, just hugged me with one arm and held on for maybe a second too long. I noticed the way she glanced at the photo wall near the stairwell. Her baby picture still hung beside the one of Warren fishing in Lake Champlain. She looked at it like she wasn't sure it belonged to her. Dinner was quiet, except for Shayla asking if the chicken had gluten. She said it like I should know, like I'd been keeping up with whatever new list of things she couldn't eat this week. "You know, Ellie," she said, mid-bite, "this house has so much potential. With a little updating, it could sell for quite a bit." I looked at her over the rim of my mug. "I'm not planning to sell." "Of course not," she smiled, brushing imaginary crumbs from her napkin. "I just meant, eventually. Planning's smart." Greg chewed with his eyes on the table. Chloe pushed peas around her plate and didn't say a word. Later, while I washed the dishes, Shayla offered to help by reorganizing my medicine cabinet. "You're on so many pills," she said, voice syrupy. "You know, it's easy for older folks to forget dosages. We'll just make sure everything's in order." I said nothing, but I heard the clink of glass bottles, heard her hum under her breath like she was fixing a puzzle she'd rather not be touching. When I finally went up for the night, I paused outside their door. Greg's voice was low, not angry, just pressed. Flat. Shayla's replies were even softer, like sugar melting into tea. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. There was something about the tone, something final, like decisions had already been made, and I was the last to know. I changed into my flannel nightgown and sat at the edge of the bed, the velvet box holding my wedding ring open beside me. Warren's chair in the living room hadn't been touched in months, but tonight it felt like someone had taken his place without asking. I woke up before dawn, same as always. Old habits don't ask permission. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while, staring at the hallway where the guest room light had been left on, just barely. It felt deliberate, not careless, not accidental. Like someone wanted me to know they hadn't gone to sleep easily either. Downstairs, I turned on the percolator and stood by the stove while it hissed and gurgled. The warmth of the mug against my palm was the first comfort I'd felt since they arrived. By 6:30, I was already at Maple and Mug, back in my usual seat. The waitress, Leanne, didn't even ask what I wanted. She just brought it. That's the thing about a place like Cedarbrook. If you come long enough, the town memorizes you, even if your family doesn't. Marcia slid into the seat across from me halfway through my toast. "How's the homecoming?" she asked it, eyebrows raised but voice gentle. "They're not staying long," I said, keeping my tone flat. "Still," she sipped her tea. "Even a short storm can knock out power." I didn't say anything, but the sentence sat with me, heavy. When I got home, the living room smelled faintly like Shayla's perfume. Something floral and too clean, like soap that didn't belong. Greg was in the kitchen, fiddling with the coffee machine he'd never liked. He looked up when I came in, but didn't smile. "Hey," he said. "We were thinking of taking Chloe to see the fall foliage up by Baxter Ridge later. You want to come?" It wasn't really a question. "I've seen leaves," I said. "You go." He nodded once, then went back to reading something on his phone. Probably work emails or Zillow. I folded laundry in the den while they were gone. Chloe had left her scarf behind, so I hung it by the door. I found an old mitten of hers tucked in the couch cushions, probably from the last visit. Funny how kids leave traces behind without meaning to, like breadcrumbs they forget to follow back. That evening, Shayla suggested they order takeout instead of eating another one of Mom's chicken things. She laughed when she said it, but it didn't feel like a joke. Greg chimed in with some excuse about wanting to give me a break, and I nodded like that made sense. I sat at the table with my own bowl of soup while they unwrapped paper cartons on the couch. Chloe sat cross-legged on the rug, quietly flipping through one of my old photo albums. She paused at a page with a picture of Greg, maybe age 7, holding a fish almost bigger than he was. Warren had his arm around him, grinning like he'd won the lottery. Chloe looked up and met my eyes, not saying anything. Then she turned the page. After dinner, Greg stood in the kitchen, holding something folded in half. "Just something for peace of mind, Mom," he said. "It's totally standard. Power of attorney stuff. You don't have to do anything now. Just look it over." He placed it gently on the counter, like he thought handling it softly might make it easier to swallow. I looked down at the paper, then back at him. "I'm still in control of my own decisions," I said. "Of course," he replied quickly. "This is just in case, for the future." But the way he said future sounded a lot like soon. They went up to bed not long after that. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at that paper. I didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, I went upstairs and sat in the dark, listening again. No whispering tonight. No voices at all. Chloe knocked softly before entering. She came to my side of the bed and handed me something. An old Polaroid of Warren and me at our anniversary party. I hadn't seen that picture in years. "You looked happy," she whispered. I didn't respond. I just looked at the image until she slipped out again. When I turned back to the bedside table, the document was there. I didn't hear anyone come in, but it had been moved closer. The next morning, I opened the kitchen cabinet and saw that my pill bottles had been rearranged, not just moved, relabeled. Shayla's handwriting was on small white stickers. Morning, evening, as needed. The labels were neat, slanted to the right. Efficient, sterile. I stood there for a long moment, not touching anything. Then I took the stickers off one by one and dropped them in the trash. The scent of lemon cleaner lingered near the sink. She'd scrubbed the counters, even wiped down the microwave, the one Greg had given me 3 Christmases ago and hadn't asked about since. I noticed the framed picture of Warren and me had been shifted an inch to the left, just off-center. Later that afternoon, I walked downtown for some air. The wind was sharp, biting through my jacket. A few neighbors waved from across the street. At the post office, Linda mentioned the Thanksgiving food drive, and I signed up to bring pies. Something to keep my hands busy. When I returned, Chloe was curled up in Warren's old armchair, flipping through the pages of Charlotte's Web. The spine had almost given out. One of the many books Greg never brought back to the library on time when he was little. She looked up when I came in. "You used to read this to Dad?" "Every fall," I said, until he said he was too old for it. She smiled but didn't speak again, just held the book against her chest like it meant something. After dinner, Greg poured himself a glass of my wine. He didn't ask, just uncorked it, sipped, and leaned on the counter like he owned the house. Shayla was upstairs doing something important on her laptop, which probably meant deleting search history or setting up online accounts with my name on them. Greg cleared his throat. "Did you get a chance to look at the paperwork?" "I saw it." He hesitated. "Look, Mom, we're just trying to help. With everything going on, it just makes sense." "With what going on?" He blinked. "Well, getting older. You've had some moments." "What moments?" "I mean, Last winter you said the heater wasn't working and it turned out you hadn't flipped the breaker. Yeah? One time. I'm just saying. We're thinking ahead. Chloe loves you. We all do. We just want to make sure you're protected. Is that what this is? I asked, my voice lower than I meant. He sighed. Why are you being so difficult? I didn't answer. I went upstairs. In the quiet of my bedroom, I sat by the dresser and opened the velvet box. The wedding band still shone, though the edges were duller now. I placed it on my finger, just for a moment. I sat there like that for a long while. Then I took the pen from the drawer. I didn't sign it, not yet, but my hand hovered over the pen longer than it should have. The unspoken threat of that document lingered in the quiet of my home, a shadow stretching over every room. I didn't sign it that night, but the fight had already begun, though I hadn't yet realized its true nature, because what started as a visit soon transformed into a takeover. They moved in like guests, but within days, I became the guest. It started subtle, just little shifts. The cinnamon oil diffuser I always kept on the hallway shelf disappeared overnight. In its place, a vanilla bean candle burned low and slow, its scent clinging to every corner of the house. My house. I stood there staring at it, the wax pooling like it owned the place. Grocery deliveries began landing on the front porch in tall brown bags, lined up like soldiers. Brands I didn't recognize. Frozen quinoa bowls, almond milk, soy yogurt in glass jars. No sign of the rye bread I liked, or the canned soup I kept on the bottom shelf. My own pantry had been reorganized top to bottom. I reached for a can of diced tomatoes and instead found a box of something called hemp protein granules. Just trying to help simplify, Mom, Shayla had said one afternoon, opening the fridge and tossing out a nearly full jar of grape jelly. Too much sugar. And did you know that brand uses dyes? I didn't answer. I never liked confrontation. I just made note of it in my head and added grape jelly to the list of things I no longer had a say over. By midweek, Chloe's routine had shifted too. She used to watch cartoons on the living room rug, her chin tucked into her palms. Now she sat in the guest room, my old sewing room, squinting into her laptop screen, nodding along to a woman I'd never seen before. Shayla called it an enrichment program, run by a friend she trusted. I didn't object, but I missed the quiet noise Chloe used to bring to the house. I began noticing things disappearing. My worn books, the ones with creased spines and notes in the margins, had been boxed up and stacked in the hallway closet. A sticky note read, "Old stuff, donate." I peeled it off and stuck it in my pocket. That night, I found a few of my framed photos tucked behind the coat rack. One of them was of Greg when he was 12, standing beside Warren at the 4th of July parade. I held it a long time, then put it back where it belonged, on the hallway table, near the lamp with the yellowed shade. Greg, for his part, stayed distracted. He was always just finishing a call or sending a quick email. His voice echoed through the house in a half murmur, something about client meetings, projections, contract renewals. He still called me Mom, but there was a practiced flatness to it, like he was performing a part. When I tried to ask him about the pantry, he smiled vaguely and said, "Shayla's just trying to help. You always say you're overwhelmed around the holidays." I don't remember saying that, but I let it go. Then one morning, I noticed my pills had changed. The small amber bottles with white caps were gone. In their place stood a sleek plastic organizer, each compartment color-coded, labeled with the day and time. Monday a.m., Tuesday p.m. I opened one and found a capsule I didn't recognize, blue on one end, white on the other. "Shayla ordered your refills through her pharmacy app," Greg explained over coffee, not looking up from his phone. She said it's more efficient. I told him I'd like to call my doctor, just to confirm. When I went to find my phone, the battery was dead. I reached for the charger in my bedroom drawer. It was missing. That was the moment I felt something shift inside me. Quietly, but sharply, I put on my coat and walked to the Maple and Mug Cafe. Marcia was there, sitting in her usual booth with the crossword. She looked up when I slid into the seat across from her. "Well, there's a face I haven't seen all week," she said gently. "Everything all right?" I nodded too quickly. "Just needed some air." Marcia looked at me for a moment longer, then sipped her tea. "It's hard," she said, "when the house doesn't feel like yours anymore." I didn't say anything, but the words hung there, just heavy enough. The walk home felt colder. Leaves gathered in the corners of the sidewalk, and the light had that early November sharpness, bright but brittle. I passed by my neighbor Harold's yard. His grandkids had tied orange and brown streamers to his porch for Thanksgiving. I wondered if Chloe would even remember we used to bake pumpkin bread the week before the holiday. She hadn't asked. Back inside, I sat on the edge of my bed and opened the drawer where I kept my journal, the one I hadn't touched in over a year. I turned to a blank page and wrote the title in slow, careful strokes, "Things They've Taken." Then I listed the first three. 1. My cinnamon oil. 2. My grape jelly. 3. My books. I closed the journal and placed it under my pillow. That night, I made mashed potatoes from scratch. The kind with lumps and butter, not the whipped ones Shayla favored. I even sprinkled in a little paprika, like Warren used to do. I served them in my chipped blue bowl, the one that had a crack down the side from a Thanksgiving 15 years ago. I placed it on the table with quiet defiance. Shayla gave it a look. Not disgust exactly, just a pause, like someone noticing a dish out of place at a formal dinner. "We have that ceramic set I ordered," she said, turning to Greg. "Might be safer for hot foods." I didn't reply, just sat down and served myself first. Chloe spooned out a small helping and whispered, "It smells like Papa's." That made me smile, briefly. After dinner, as Greg scrolled through something on his phone, Shayla pulled a zippered pouch from her tote bag. "Here," she said, placing it in front of me. "This will make it easier to keep things straight." Inside was a bright plastic pill organizer, the same kind I'd seen on late-night commercials. "Color-coded and foolproof," she added. "I've been managing just fine," I said softly, touching the edge of the pouch. My voice sounded distant to my own ears, like it belonged to someone else. Shayla's tone didn't shift. "I'm sure you have. But this way, there's less room for error." I wanted to ask her what error she thought I was making. Instead, I looked at Greg. He was still on his phone, nodding at something I couldn't see. Later that night, I emptied the contents of my nightstand drawer. The pill bottles were gone. Every one. I checked the bathroom cabinet, the linen closet. Nothing. Only the organizer remained. I stared at it under the dim hallway light. Each compartment clicked when I pressed the lid down. Tuesday p.m., Wednesday a.m. They were all filled, but the labels on the pills inside were missing. I picked one up, held it close to the lamp. No pharmacy logo. No name. I opened the compartment marked Monday a.m. and took out a capsule I didn't recognize. The color was off. A pale, cloudy green. I had never taken anything like it before. I didn't swallow it. Instead, I placed it in a tissue and tucked it into the drawer beneath my winter socks. Then I added another entry in my journal. 4. My pills. The next morning, I walked out to the mailbox just after sunrise. The frost was thick across the grass, and my slippers soaked through almost instantly. I flipped through the envelopes, bills, a magazine, and one thick catalog addressed to Shayla. I paused. My name wasn't on anything. Inside, the kitchen smelled like protein powder and cut ginger. Shayla stood at the counter mixing a drink in a tall blender. "You're up early," she said, still facing away. "Greg had a late call. I made you a shake. Low sugar, high fiber." "I'll make oatmeal," I replied. She turned just enough to flash that patient smile. "Of course, if you'd rather." I stood there watching her pour the shake into 3 glasses, not 4. Greg came down a few minutes later in one of Warren's old sweaters. I recognized it instantly, the faded gray one with the tiny snag on the left sleeve. Warren used to wear it while raking leaves. I had kept it in the back closet. I opened my mouth, closed it again. He didn't notice. Just grabbed the glass Shayla handed him and started scrolling his phone again. I left the kitchen and walked upstairs, each step creaking louder than it should have. In my room, Chloe sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through one of my old photo albums. "Who's this?" she asked, pointing to a photo. "That's your grandfather," I said, sitting beside her. "We took that in '79, the year the town parade got rained out." "He looks like Daddy." "He does," I smiled. "He had the same nose." She turned the page slowly. "I like this room better." "Better than what?" "Downstairs. It smells nicer up here." And I didn't say anything. I just ran my fingers through her hair and tried not to cry. When she left, I pulled the velvet box from my top drawer. Inside was my wedding ring. I slipped it onto my finger for the first time in months, just to remember how it felt. Heavy, solid, mine. Then I heard Greg's voice from downstairs. I stood at the top of the stairs, just out of view. Greg's voice floated up in a low murmur, the kind of voice people use when they think they're being private, but not too private to care if someone happens to overhear. "I don't know, Shayla. She's fine, just slower than before." Pause. "No, I haven't brought it up again." She didn't sign, just hovered there, like she was going to. Another pause, longer this time. I could picture him pinching the bridge of his nose like Warren used to when the checkbook didn't balance. I know. I'm trying." The stairs creaked under my foot. Just once. Silence. I waited, holding my breath. Then the blender roared back to life in the kitchen like nothing had happened. Back in my room, I pulled out the journal again. 5. Warren's sweater. 6. My mail. 7. My pace. I tapped the pen twice against the page before writing the 8th entry in a shaky hand. 8. My trust. That afternoon, Shayla asked if I wanted help folding the laundry. I told her I was fine. She followed me into the laundry room anyway. I watched as she pulled my cotton nightgowns from the dryer, examining the faded edges like they were relics from another planet. "You know," she said, "Greg and I were talking about simplifying things for you. Less clutter, easier mornings." "Clutter?" I repeated. She smiled tightly. "Just modernizing." I didn't reply. I folded my nightgowns and set them in the linen basket one by one, slow and careful, like folding pages of my own story. After dinner that night, they left the dishes in the sink again. I stood at the counter and rinsed each plate under hot water. Not because I wanted to, because I needed to. I needed something that hadn't been taken yet. My rhythm, my routine. I looked at the dish towel draped on the oven handle. It had a stitched sunflower in the corner, half faded. Chloe had made it in school 3 years ago. Her teacher had mailed it to me. Back then, Greg didn't even mention it on the phone. The sound of a drawer slamming upstairs made me jump. I dried my hands and went to the hallway. Their bedroom door was closed, light slipping out from underneath. I didn't listen this time. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked to the linen closet. Top shelf, behind the extra towels, was my fireproof box. birth certificates, Warren's discharge papers, and my original prescription list from Dr. Lyman. I opened the box. The documents were untouched, but the list, handwritten, double-checked every year, was missing. I didn't panic. I just stood there and let the quiet settle around me like a blanket too thin to warm. Later, when the house had gone still, I turned on my bedside lamp and opened the pill organizer Shayla gave me. The compartments clicked in that same cheerful way, color-coded and innocent. I opened Tuesday morning, white pill, oval, no markings. I opened Wednesday, round, pale pink, nothing familiar. Then Monday, I picked up a cloudy green capsule I hadn't seen before, turned it in my palm. I opened the organizer that night and didn't recognize the name on the first pill. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I did. Every word. That afternoon, the sky had turned the color of old pewter. It was one of those days where the cold had a quiet edge, slipping under door frames and settling in your joints. I stayed in, sitting in my corner armchair, the one with the faded armrest where Warren used to rest his coffee. My cross-stitch was slow work, but it kept my fingers from going stiff. Greg and Shayla had left for groceries, though I hadn't asked for anything. They didn't either. I was stitching the edge of a cardinal's wing when the house phone rang. The landline, not my cell. I hadn't heard it all week. Greg had insisted on using his mobile for efficiency. I answered out of habit. Hello? Silence. Then a startled, "Oh, sorry. Is Greg there?" The voice was clipped, male, professional. "One moment," I said. I walked to Greg's office upstairs, the room that used to be Chloe's when she was smaller, back when they visited for more than just appearances. Greg was sitting at the desk, earphones in, speaking into his cell. He didn't notice me. I tapped the door twice and held up the landline receiver. He gestured for me to hand it to him. I passed it over. He didn't say thank you. I went back downstairs, the cardinal's wing waiting in its half-finished flutter. A breeze stirred the edge of the curtain. I adjusted it and returned to my chair. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. They were still gone. The house was still, except for the faint tick of the kitchen clock and the steady thump of the dryer. Then something odd. A small, repetitive clicking sound, low and tinny, like someone adjusting their seatbelt on the other end of a phone line. I turned toward the kitchen, where the house phone still sat in its cradle. No blinking red light. I walked over and picked up the receiver, not knowing why. And there it was, his voice. "So she hasn't asked questions?" Pause. "She won't. She's always been like this, passive. She trusts people." Another pause, and then Shayla's voice, closer, clearer. "That's what we're counting on. The papers are in. One signature, and we'll move forward. Serenity Oaks will accept her next week." Greg exhaled, almost like a laugh. "She won't be around much longer anyway." Something hollow opened in my chest. The floor under me didn't move. Nothing in the house did. But something had shifted. I didn't breathe. "She looked at the papers," Shayla continued. "I could see it in her face. She's starting to get suspicious." "I'll talk to her again," Greg said. "Tonight. If she hasn't signed by Friday, we'll just say it's a temporary arrangement. Short-term care." There was some rustling, then a muffled sound like a car door closing. I dropped the receiver, not because I was afraid, not because I was overwhelmed, because my hands were trembling, but not from weakness, from anger. I stood there for a while, the sound of my own breath louder than anything else. The floor felt cold beneath my socks. Somewhere outside, the wind rattled the mailbox lid, but I didn't move. They hadn't meant for me to hear that. It wasn't a mistake. It was a revelation. I wasn't their mother anymore. I was a task, a burden, something to Finalize. I walked back into the living room. The stitching sat untouched on the armrest. The cardinal looked frozen in mid-flight, like it too had been caught off guard. I sat. My hands still buzzed. I tried to still them by folding them in my lap, but it wasn't working. I went upstairs, not to cry, not to lie down and rest my nerves like some fragile woman in an old movie. I opened my dresser drawer and pulled out the small velvet box. Warren's ring still sat beside mine. I hadn't worn it since he passed. I held it between my fingers and closed my eyes. If he were here, I imagined he'd raise one brow, the way he used to when someone insulted me behind a compliment. "They think I'm blind," I whispered. But Warren didn't answer. I got up, went to the closet. Behind a row of cardigans and outdated holiday sweaters, tucked behind a stack of old library books I never returned, was the lockbox. I kept it more out of habit than purpose. The key was taped behind my jewelry stand, where no one but me would look. It slid in easily. The latch opened with a pop. Inside, my birth certificate, Warren's discharge papers from the service, the deed to the house, a second phone. Not a smartphone, just a prepaid flip phone I'd bought after my neighbor Dot had hers stolen and never replaced. It had 1 bar of battery left. I plugged it in, sat down, waited. That night, when they returned from the grocery run, I was in the kitchen, pretending to read a recipe I'd already memorized decades ago. A pie I no longer had the hands to make. Greg glanced at me, said nothing. Shayla put away almond flour, oat milk, and a dozen items I hadn't asked for. My fridge looked like a stranger's now. "Everything okay, Mom?" Greg asked Isidon, too casually. I smiled. "Of course." He nodded and disappeared into the guest room. Shayla stayed, folding dish towels as if she lived here. "Your energy's low," she said, not even looking up. "You should try these magnesium drops I ordered. Helps with sleep." I thanked her, just to watch her nod like she'd fixed something. Later, I walked into the hallway. The door to the guest room was open just a crack. Inside, their luggage was now unpacked. Greg's shoes lined the closet. Shayla's toiletries filled the bathroom counter. I walked past the mirror and didn't recognize myself for a second. It wasn't just age. It was the way my face held itself now, too still. Back in my room, I sat on the bed and opened my old journal. I hadn't touched it in years. The page was yellowed, but the pen still worked. I wrote, "Things they've taken." Under it, I listed the cinnamon oil, the radio, my books, the quiet, my name. I noticed Greg called me Ma now. Not Mom, just Ma, distant, flat. Then I added my trust and circled it. I closed the book. In the drawer, I found an old business card. Raymond Hargrove, elder law attorney. He'd spoken at the library years ago. I kept his card because he'd been kind, not because I thought I'd need it, but maybe I did now. I sat with the phone in my hand. Just sat. The hallway was dark, except for the small amber glow of the nightlight I'd started leaving on again. Like I used to when Greg was a boy, afraid of monsters. Now, the monster was real, and it was in the guest room. The next morning, I waited until they both left again. Shayla had a quick errand, and Greg tagged along with the excuse of needing more printer paper. I watched them drive away from the front window, holding my coffee cup without drinking a drop. Once the taillights disappeared, I moved quickly. I went to the kitchen. The pill organizer Shayla had given me sat right where she left it, on the counter, color-coded and lined up like candy. I opened each day's compartment, one by one, emptying them onto a paper towel. Then I took my own bottles out of the trash, wiped them off, and placed them back in the cabinet where they'd always been. Then I walked to the den and unplugged the landline from the wall. No more accidental eavesdropping for them. After that, I went upstairs, locked the door to my bedroom, and picked up the prepaid phone. I called the number on the business card. It rang 4 times before someone answered. "Hargrove Law," a young voice said. "This is Ellie Bishop," I replied. "I need to speak with Raymond." A pause. "May I ask what it's regarding?" "Estate security," I said, keeping my voice even. "And family interference." Another pause. "I'll connect you," she said, and then the line went quiet except for the soft rustle of hold music. When Raymond picked up, his voice hadn't changed. "Mrs. Bishop," he said warmly. "It's been a while." "It has," I said. "And I'm afraid I need your help." He didn't ask why. Not yet. Instead, he said, "Tell me everything, from the beginning." So I did. I left out no detail. Not the power of attorney form, not the call I overheard, not even the new pills, or how my pantry now smelled like gluten-free oats and lavender sachets. When I was done, Raymond let out a long breath. "You're smart to call," he said. "We can stop this." "Quietly," I said. He understood. "We'll need to move a few pieces into place." "I've already started," I said. "We agreed to meet later that week. In town, not at the house." When I hung up, I looked out the window again. The sky was gray, not raining, but the kind of air that made your bones ache before you even stepped outside. I went back to the kitchen and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. Chloe walked in a few minutes later. Her eyes flicked to the phone in my hand before I tucked it into my cardigan pocket. "Hi, Grandma," she said. "Hi, sweetheart." She stood there awkwardly. Then, "Do you still have that book about the mouse who finds the mitten?" "Missy Mouse's Lost Mitten?" She nodded. "Can we read it tonight?" I smiled. "Of course we can." She turned to go, then stopped. "I like your room," she said quietly. "It smells like cinnamon." I didn't answer right away. "Thanks, baby." She left. I stood there a moment longer, then reached for my journal again. Under the list of things they've taken, I added a new line. "The illusion," and right below it, "The fire, because something had changed now. They thought I was drifting, weak, easy to move like a chess piece. But that call, those 10 seconds Greg forgot, flipped the board. I made a new list on a fresh page. Steps. Watch 1. Meet Raymond. 2. Cancel power of attorney consideration. 3. Secure bank and property documents. 4. Watch every move. 5. Wait. I wasn't in a hurry. They had no idea I knew. That was my advantage. Later that evening, we had dinner. Shayla served some quinoa casserole I didn't touch. Greg scrolled through his phone while eating, barely looking up. Chloe played with the edge of her napkin. Shayla asked if I wanted to go over any health stuff after. I smiled. "I'm good." Greg looked at me, then down at his plate. No one spoke for a while. After dinner, they went back to their room. I washed the dishes slowly, hands in hot water, staring out the darkened window above the sink. That night, I didn't cry. I made a list. They thought I'd go quietly, but I've lived too long to leave without a voice. I sat at the kitchen table, staring out at the bare maple tree in the front yard. A dusting of frost clung to the grass, turning it silver under the early morning light. The hum of the refrigerator was louder than usual, maybe because everything else had fallen so quiet. Greg and Shayla were still asleep upstairs. Chloe, bless her, had curled up on the couch last night, asking me to read one of her bedtime books from years ago. She had outgrown it, of course, but I read anyway. Her little hand rested on my arm the entire time, like she needed the contact to keep grounded. I stirred a teaspoon of honey into my tea. No more cinnamon oil lingering in the air, not since Shayla started lighting those headache-inducing vanilla candles. I made a mental note to toss one in the trash later. On the surface, things hadn't changed much. Shayla still micromanaged my meals, Greg still retreated behind his phone calls, and Chloe drifted between our worlds like a bird unsure where to land. But something inside me had shifted. The phone call, the words I wasn't supposed to hear, the truth I could never unhear. It had done more than break my heart. It lit something. They were planning to remove me. Quietly, legally, efficiently, but they didn't know I had been through worse. I had outlived my husband, cancer, and the slow ache of loneliness. This I could handle. And I would. Quietly, legally, efficiently. I pulled out the list I had started the night of the call. It wasn't long, yet, but every line was precise. Who I needed to talk to, what documents to find, what to watch for. I wasn't playing checkers anymore. This was chess. Later that morning, I bundled myself in Warren's old navy blue peacoat, still smelled faintly of his cologne, and took the slow walk to Raymond's place. The frost crunched under my boots. I liked that sound. Clean. Honest. Raymond lived 3 blocks down, in a brick house with crooked shutters and a rusted mailbox that never closed right. He was already on the porch, rocking gently with a plaid blanket across his knees and a mug of coffee in hand. "Well, I'll be," he said with a small smile. "Ellie Bishop on my front steps. It's not even a Sunday." I managed a smile back. "Felt like walking. Frost woke up the town, didn't it?" He nodded, motioning to the chair next to him. "Sit. Warm yourself a bit." I did, tucking the coat tighter around my chest. "Still drink it black?" "Only way it makes sense," he said, and handed me the extra mug. "You didn't come just to say hello." "No," I admitted. "I wanted to ask you something. It's private." Raymond's expression didn't change, but the warmth in his eyes sharpened. "Go on." "Back when Warren passed," I said, keeping my voice low, "he mentioned something about a safe deposit box. Said if anything ever felt wrong, I could go to you." Raymond was silent for a beat. Then he leaned forward and tapped the armrest. "I still have it. Bank never closed the box after his death. Was under both your names." My breath caught. "You still have the key?" "I do. And if it's time, I'll take you there myself, tomorrow." I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Raymond." He didn't press further. That was his gift. Not assuming the worst, not pretending he knew more than he did. Just being steady. The kind of man who understood trust without needing it spelled out. On the way home, I passed by Maple and Mug Cafe and slipped inside. The warmth, the cinnamon toast, the scent of fresh grounds. It felt like breathing again. Marcia raised an eyebrow when she saw me. "Well, if it isn't the invisible woman." "Been around," I said, trying to smile. "Got something for you." I handed her a small manila envelope. "Don't open it, just keep it, in case I forget something important." Marcia didn't question it. She only nodded once and tucked it beneath the cash drawer. When I got back, the house felt different. Not colder, not warmer, just still. Shayla was on the couch, tapping at her tablet, legs tucked under her like a cat that didn't want to be disturbed. "Out for your little walk?" she said, without looking up. "Just getting some air," I replied, hanging Warren's coat on the rack. I watched her fingers swipe, pause, swipe again. Her passcode, 4 digits, easy to see if you were quiet. I pretended to fuss with the flowers by the sideboard while committing it to memory. That night, I climbed up to the attic. It was colder than I remembered. but the smell was the same. Dust, cedar, the past. I found the trunk under a faded quilt. My hands trembled only once as I undid the latch. Inside were the things Greg didn't know existed, because I had learned long ago to keep them where he'd never think to look. The house creaked as the wind hit the windows. I reached in and found the paperwork Warren had insisted on keeping. The deed, the letters, the little notes with his blocky handwriting, some legal, some personal, some both. And then, beneath them all, a page so crisp it didn't belong in this sea of aging paper. One page changed everything, and they had no idea I still had it. It had been years since I walked that trail near the Dalesville Library, but the wooden bench beneath the old maple was still there. Raymond Hargrove was already waiting, wool coat zipped up, cap pulled low, his cane resting across his knees. He rose when he saw me, slower than before, but still carrying that quiet soldier's discipline. We exchanged no hug, just a firm, knowing nod. He spoke first. Warren used to drag me to this very bench every Sunday after church, made me sit through his lectures on FDR and the Red Sox. I smiled, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. "I need your memory today, not your baseball opinions." He chuckled, then leaned closer. "I figured. You only ever call me Raymond when it's serious." I told him about the safe deposit box Warren kept, how I'd forgotten all about it until now. He leaned back, eyes narrowing in thought. "Box 127, he muttered after a while. "Still under Warren's name, but he had you as a co-signer. Only reason I remember is because I notarized one of the forms myself." "Could you help me check if it still exists?" Raymond nodded without hesitation. "I can take you tomorrow. No questions asked." As I rose to leave, he reached into his coat pocket and handed me a small envelope. "You should read this. Warren wrote it a few months before he passed. He gave it to me to hold until she needs it," he said. The letter sat heavy in my coat pocket the entire walk home. Back at the house, Chloe was curled on the couch, thumbing through a worn leather photo album. She looked up when I entered, her voice small. "Grandma, were you really a librarian?" "For 42 years, I said, sitting beside her. "Your grandfather used to say I could find the truth faster than most people could find their shoes." She flipped a page, then paused at a picture of me reading to Greg as a toddler, his mop of curls buried against my shoulder. "Was Daddy always mad?" I froze. There it was, plain, innocent, and far too heavy for a 10-year-old to carry. "No," I said after a long pause. "He used to love stories." Chloe nodded like that explained everything. Maybe in her world it did. That night, after they all went to bed, I retrieved my old spare phone from the back of the linen closet, still wrapped in a flannel case. It buzzed to life like an old dog remembering its name. I called Marcia. "You okay?" she asked, voice rough with sleep. "I need you to hold something for me," I whispered. "A sealed envelope. Don't open it. Just in case." She didn't ask why. "Come by tomorrow." In the early morning haze, I watched Shayla at the kitchen table, tapping on her tablet. She sipped her green smoothie, perfectly still in her spotless robe. I lingered by the counter, pretending to search for sugar, and glanced sideways. 4 swipes, then the code. 0457. Easy to remember. Greg's birthday, April 5th, 1977. I repeated it silently all the way back to my room, my breath steady, my fingers clenched. Later, I crept up into the attic, careful with the creaky steps. The trunk sat beneath an old quilt, its brass latch tarnished but unbroken. Inside were the relics of a life half forgotten: wedding photos, his military medals, a hospital bill from 1973, and beneath it all, a folder marked Property Cedarbrook. I opened it, breath catching as I scanned the notarized deed. It was still there, a clause highlighted in Warren's scratchy hand. Life estate rights, reserved for Eleanor Bishop. Full residential protection until time of voluntary release or natural passing. They couldn't take the house, not legally. I laughed, not out loud, but deep in my chest, like the first roll of distant thunder before a storm. I brought the box down to the dining table and opened it slowly, as if dusting off the final corner of my silence. Inside were Warren's old papers, yellowed mortgage forms, letters in his handwriting, and one manila folder with a brittle rubber band around it. The deed. I remembered that day at the notary's office. Warren had insisted on keeping my name on everything, just in case. I had argued back then. It felt too old-fashioned. Now, I could have kissed the man. Inside the folder was the page that changed everything. A clause that said the property could never be sold, transferred, or otherwise reassigned without my express written consent as long as I remained living in it. Greg didn't know. Shayla wouldn't expect this. And best of all, it was notarized and witnessed, one of them by Raymond himself, back in 1998. I folded the page neatly and placed it in a new envelope. Then I made 2 copies, one for Raymond to hold and another for Marcia. Quiet insurance. The original went back into the box, and the box returned to the trunk. I stood in the attic, hand on the dusty wood, letting the quiet settle around me. Below me, I could hear Shayla clicking away on her tablet, Greg's muffled voice talking about paperwork again, and Chloe's footsteps. She was humming something low, aimless. One page changed everything, and they had no idea I still had it. A quiet strength settled in my bones. They had seen only the librarian, the widow, the elderly woman. They had never imagined the wolf beneath the lamb's fleece, and that, I realized, was their greatest mistake. The Thanksgiving dinner was approaching, and I intended to serve them a dish they would never forget. The turkey was dry, the smiles were forced, and every knife on the table had 2 edges. It snowed just enough to quiet the roads and frost the mailbox. I'd always liked Thanksgiving mornings. The slow wake-up of the world, the hum of kitchens on our street, the scent of butter and sage drifting through curtains. But this morning, all I smelled was tension wrapped in vanilla and control. Shayla had taken over the kitchen by 7 a.m., dressed in one of those aprons that say, "Thankful, grateful, blessed," in gold cursive. She barked directions like she was catering a corporate brunch, not preparing a family dinner. Greg stayed out of her way, fumbling with the fireplace logs. Chloe hovered between rooms like a little ghost, careful not to get underfoot. I had woken early, same as always. In the quiet hour before the coffee machine gurgled, I pulled out my own stuffing recipe. Not the one from the binder Shayla kept flipping through on her iPad. Mine. The one with toasted sourdough, celery, apple, sage, and that secret dash of poultry seasoning I never told anyone about. I made it in silence, covered the dish with foil, and slid it into the second oven. The old one in the basement I knew Shayla wouldn't touch. Just enough for me and Chloe. Just enough for memory. By 11 a.m., the table was set with Shayla's new gold-accented placemats. Every plate matched, every napkin folded like a magazine spread. Candles flickered politely along the runner. I'd always loved the old mismatched linens Warren and I used. These looked like they belonged to someone else's holiday. The television played soft jazz. Greg poured wine, though he barely sipped his glass. Chloe set out the silverware with quiet precision. She placed my fork with a tiny nod. Her hands looked so careful, too careful for a child. "You sit and relax, Mom," Greg said, gesturing toward the couch. "We've got everything handled." I smiled and obeyed. I'd been obeying a lot lately. But as I sat, my phone buzzed in my sweater pocket. A message from Marcia. "Happy Thanksgiving. Thinking of you." I replied. "You too. Thank you for everything." I wanted to say more, but my fingers couldn't decide if this was the beginning of something brave or the end of something familiar. Dinner was served at 2 sharp. Shayla insisted on it. She placed the bird at the center of the table like a conquest. Greg carved it, struggling slightly, glancing at her for direction. No one commented on the dryness. Chloe scooped mashed potatoes for me without being asked. I touched her hand lightly. She looked up, eyes searching, as if waiting for a cue I wasn't sure I could give. "I made the stuffing," Shayla announced. "It's quinoa and fig, heart-healthy, low sodium." Greg added, "We're really trying to take care of Mom this year." "Oh," I said softly. "Well, I made some too, the old kind, just in case anyone still remembers it." I stood and went to the kitchen, returned with the steaming dish from downstairs, and placed it beside hers. No one spoke. Chloe beamed. When we sat again, she leaned toward me and whispered, "I like your food better." Greg lifted his wine glass. "To Mom," he said awkwardly. "For all she's done." "Really?" Shayla followed, clinking glasses. "And for trusting us with her future." The words stuck like bones in my throat. I smiled anyway. At that moment, Raymond knocked on the door. "I saw your light on," he said with an innocent grin. "Smelled real food. Figured there'd be a seat." I'd already left one empty. He sat across from me. Greg tensed. Shayla blinked. We ate in a strained rhythm, the sound of forks and soft jazz colliding. Beneath the table, I passed Raymond a folded envelope and my phone. His hand was steady as he slid both into his coat pocket. "Just photos," I said lightly. "He's helping me digitize old albums." Greg nodded, unsure. Shayla poured more wine. Then, casually, she turned to Chloe. "Your new bed frame will be here next week." The listing went faster than I thought. "My bed?" Chloe asked. "Your grandma's," Shayla corrected. "We're upgrading. New start." Greg's knife clinked against his plate. "We should have talked about that first, Shay." She waved a hand. "It's just furniture. Sentimental value, sure. But it's not like she..." She stopped herself, glanced at me. "We're thinking of what's next. It's proactive." I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I let the stuffing speak for me. Raymond dabbed the corner of his mouth with a napkin. "You know," he said gently, "just so we're clear, legally speaking, Ellie still owns this house." Silence. Utter, clean, suffocating silence. Shayla's fork froze midair. Greg's face went blank. And I just took another bite of my stuffing. They came to take everything. They left with nothing. The snow blanketed the town like a hush that had finally landed. After weeks of cracks and collisions, it was strange how silence could feel soft again. I stood by the window that morning, watching the world slow under white. Somewhere inside, the kettle hummed to a boil, but I didn't rush to it. I had time now, time that was mine again. Greg and Shayla arrived just after 10. Not early enough to seem sincere, not late enough to be careless. Shayla's boots clacked sharp on the steps. Greg lingered behind her like a forgotten apology. I greeted them without warmth or grudge, just the kind of voice you use with people who once mattered more than they should have. Raymond sat quietly in the corner, phone in hand, already connected to my attorney. The speaker crackled. "Ms. Bishop is within full legal authority to manage her property and affairs without guardianship. All documents presented previously were unsolicited and have been voided." Greg's jaw tightened. "I'd like to go over a few things," I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The pill switching, the calls to Serenity Oaks, the listings for furniture that didn't belong to you. And this. I held up the old deed, the one with Warren's signature and the clause that had never been updated. This house remains mine, entirely. There is no transfer of ownership. Shayla's eyes narrowed. We were just trying to help. No, I replied. You were trying to replace me before I was gone. Greg looked at the floor. I didn't shake. I didn't yell. I spoke each sentence like I was laying bricks beneath my own feet, building something steady again. You'll need to leave by tomorrow, I said simply. Shayla stood, arms crossed. You'll regret this. No, I said. But you might. Greg opened his mouth, closed it again. I didn't mean to. I know, I said. And that's the saddest part. Upstairs, Chloe was packing silently. When I stepped into the room, she turned and asked, Do I have to go? Her voice was quiet but firm. She wasn't crying. I crouched to meet her eyes. You don't have to choose anything today, but I want you to remember what's true. She nodded, and I placed a folded letter in her coat pocket. In case you forget. My son forgot to hang up, and I heard him tell his wife. She won't be around much longer anyway. 2 weeks later, chaos. Have you ever looked around your own home and realized you were no longer welcome there? Not because of strangers, but because of your own blood. The blanket your husband once wrapped around your shoulders? Replaced with silence. The kitchen you cooked in for decades? Taken over. Your name? Signed onto papers you never read. They said they came home to spend time with me, but what they really wanted was everything I had. I wasn't supposed to hear that phone call, but I did. Every single word. And that's when something shifted. This is not a story about revenge. It's about remembering who you are when everyone else wants you to forget. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, stay with me. Subscribe if you believe no elder should be silenced in their own home. My name is Ellie Bishop. I'm 72 years old, a widow, and a retired librarian from Cedar Brook, Vermont. I've spent most of my life making sure others were cared for. My students, my neighbors, my son. I never asked for much. Just a little kindness. A little space to grow old quietly. But a few weeks ago, my son came back home. And slowly, without a single argument or slammed door, I started to vanish from my own life. This isn't some dramatic courtroom story. No one yelled. No one hit. It was all soft voices, gentle smiles, while my world was being rewritten without me. And maybe that's why it took me so long to see what was really happening. But once I did, I made a list, and I took back everything they thought I'd lost. What follows isn't just my story. It's a reminder, especially to those of you who've spent your whole life giving, that you are allowed to fight quietly and win. Let me tell you what happened, starting with a knock at the door. The sound that promised a reunion, but in truth, heralded